teenager, my minister gave me a book of prayers for teens. And one of my favorite prayers in it was, "Give me the grace of unconscious goodness." And I prayed that often, and I meant it sincerely. Because to me, that meant that I wanted to be good and to have goodness come from my heart, not from planning or plotting or thinking it through. It's too simplistic to say only from the heart, not the head, because both need to be involved in following God's will, of course. But it was too often easier for me to think things through, to do the head trip without considering all the emotional impact for people involved, including myself. And I think the scriptures this week that we read encourage us to use both our heads and our hearts in seeking and understanding and following God's commands. Some would frame it, follow the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And the spirit comes from the heart as unconscious goodness. That comes from having Jesus' love deep in our hearts. Jesus told his followers that their righteousness needed to be greater than that of the Pharisees who studied and carried out many of those Jewish laws. And they may have carried out the letter of the laws and the rituals, but they didn't really have the heart of compassion that Jesus hoped and wanted them to have. The first commandment was to love God, and the second to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the spirit of the law. To have the heart of God and to make your life decisions based on that love. You may have seen the bumper sticker that reads, "Are we kinder and gentler yet?" When we hear so much in the news about road rage and school shootings and robberies and murders and arson, etc., it seems like a very important question. Are we kinder and gentler yet? It's a nice idea, as long as we don't mean wimpy. But is it possible? The kindest and gentlest people I know are certainly not wimpy, but they have a deep reservoir of strength, of grace, of courage, of love. And the two scriptures today reflect the attempts of both Jesus and Moses to create a kinder and gentler community of believers. They knew firsthand how mean, how angry, how malicious and confused people can be, and how that can destroy relationships and the joy of living. In the reading today that Ty read, Moses knew he was soon going to die. This is his farewell address. So he gathered the Hebrew people together on the plain of Moab. And he wanted to tell them one more time to live a good life. He wants them to take his sermon to heart. He'd been through a lot with those willful and cranky Israelites over the years. He had tried to be the leader and God's prophet to them, a thankless task at best. And we know the stories of their ups and downs, sometimes putting Moses on a pedestal, expecting miracles, sometimes grumbling at him and each other and at God, and even disobeying Moses and God's commandments. The words and tones of Moses' charge the people as strong and perhaps even threatening, because knowing their hearts, Moses is prodding them to be kinder and gentler folks to each other. And he knows what a big challenge that is in reality. So Moses says, obedience to God is a matter of life and death. God will help you find the way. He says, this commandment isn't really too much for you. It's not out of your reach. It's not on some high mountain. You don't have to get mountaineers to climb the peak and bring it down to your level and explain it to you before you live it. It's not across the ocean. You don't have to send sailors out to get it and bring it back and explain it before you can live it. This word is nearer to you than you think. It's right here and now, as near as the heart in your chest. So just do it. Love God. Walk in God's ways. Keep the commandments so that you will live, truly live, passionately, exuberantly, blessed by God. But I warn you, if you have a change of heart, if you refuse to listen, if you serve those other little gods, you will most certainly die. I call heaven and earth to witness against you. I place before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your children will live abundantly and exuberantly and blessedly. Love God, because God is love. God is life itself. Moses stood with the children of Israel at the edge of the promised land and challenged them to choose life. And I'm sure we all know moments when we feel like we have indeed chosen life. But there are also those days when we know we haven't. It seems like we should naturally always choose life, but it's not always easy to do so, is it? According to an old preacher's story, years ago when spies were captured by the Persian army and brought in for execution, one particular general would give the spy the unusual choice of either facing a firing squad or whatever was behind a big black door. And according to the legend, the spies always decided on the firing squad. They did not know that the door led to nothing terrifying. It simply led outside to freedom. And when the general was asked why he gave prisoners a choice that would lead them to freedom, he said, "Almost everyone chooses death over the unknown. People are actually more afraid to live than to die. Anyone with the courage to choose what they don't already know," he said, "deserves life." Christians are supposed to keep choosing life even when we don't know what's on the other side of that door. We're to choose life when we're confronted with oppression and injustice and idolatry. Jesus didn't say it was easy, but he said it's life-giving. We are to be in solidarity with those who are down and out, more than with those in powerful positions. It's so easy to succumb to following the crowd or being politically correct without considering the compassionate and caring response that we could make instead. Jesus, like Moses, asks us to choose life. In today's part of the Sermon on the Mount, he specifically talks about anger, about resentment, lack of forgiveness, and how it can sap the life and the joy right out of us and our families, our friends, our community. When we hold on to anger at anyone, we create a toxic poison that can fester inside, and it keeps us at a distance from God and from other people. In our Bible study this week, we talked about some people who have really good reasons to be angry. And not everybody, but some of them that we talked about were able to overcome their anger, overcome their resentment, and eventually embody the love and reconciliation that Jesus demonstrated in his life, that he wants for all of us. And I found this true story about two Canadian farmers who were neighbors. One day, Farmer Brown's dog got loose and mauled the 2-year-old child of Farmer Smith. And the child died from the injuries. Now, Farmer Smith was so devastated that he cut off all relationships with the neighboring Browns. and they were enemies for years. Then Farmer Brown had a fire that destroyed his property. His barn and his equipment were all gone. And that meant he was unable to plow or plant his seeds, and his future was doomed. The next morning, after the fire, when he awoke, Farmer Brown found his field plowed and ready for planting. And to his amazement, he found out that his neighbor, Farmer Smith, had done the good deed. And he approached him and he asked, "Why did you do it?" And his former enemy said, "I plowed your field so that God can live." It was his way of seeking forgiveness and of offering forgiveness that can restore vital life, not only to their relationship, but to others and especially to God. Through his painful time of grief and anger at his neighbor and at God, Farmer Smith had come to realize how lonely he was, how destructive his anger was for all of his relationships. And it is indeed a kind of death. And when he realized that his neighbor had a terrible calamity in his life too, Farmer Smith was able to reach down into his own heart and find the compassion and forgiveness that he himself had needed. And he was able to use it and share it for his former enemy. He was able to reach out and offer support during his time of devastation. God offers each of us a loving, forgiving relationship and invites us to be the people of God who share that mercy and grace with others. And it doesn't mean just a nice sweet smile or an occasional hello or even a shared meal. Jesus shows us that it may be difficult, but so very important to care about, to pray for, and be in solidarity with people who are not easy or fun to love. And it can be a costly love, like what it cost Farmer Smith to give up his anger and to offer a sincere effort to improve his broken relationship with Farmer Brown. It was more than just a nice, sweet little "I'm sorry." To be truly kinder and gentler people, we need to be in touch with our own vulnerabilities, our own grief and joy, our own opportunities to seek God's love and forgiveness and to receive it deep in our own hearts and souls. And then when we have peace within ourselves and with God, then we are unconsciously kinder and gentler people who can offer others genuine love from the heart. May it be so for us.